want to unmute again.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Lori Schreier. Welcome. I'm a member of New Hampshire for Safe Technology for a couple of years. I got involved when I recognized that we were surrounded by a lot of wireless radiation, and I decided not to welcome it into my own home. And I'm glad that I made those choices to hardwire, because I feel relatively healthy and safe in my home. And when I go to environments where there's a lot of Wi-Fi and things of that nature, I certainly can feel my energy being zapped. And so it's good to know ways to address that and to learn how to protect ourselves on an individual level, and to work to advocate in the community in ways that we can help each other to reduce radiation exposures and still use our technology. And so the goals of New Hampshire for Safe Technology are to educate, inform, and protect, and to help us all do that together, because we do need more and more voices in this effort. The industry is very strong and there is a lot that we can do, but we need to do it together. And there's a lot of good news coming from other places where they have instituted protective measures, and we can do it in New Hampshire and in our local communities. And so welcome, and thank you for joining us tonight. And Cece is going to tell us a lot about the different ways that we can protect ourselves in how we use our devices, because we do need to use them and they do come in handy. And also ways that we can join together to make those protective changes. I'll let Cece introduce herself, and thank you so much, Cece, for joining us once again and doing these bi-monthly webinars.
Oh, you're very welcome, Lori, and thank you so much. And to Jen White, and also to Deb Hodgson, who's not able to be with us tonight. But you guys are just doing such amazing work up in New Hampshire, and we're just very honored to partner with you on this. So I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share and go into full slide mode. Lori, can you give me a nod if you can see my slides?
Yes, very good.
Okay, super. All right, so thank you, everybody. We will make these slides available when we post the video. If you just go into the video description on YouTube, then you will be able to drill down into all of the links that we're going to give you in here. We ask that you not take our word on any of this. We want you to know these facts for yourself. So please, if it's helpful to you to use these slides to launch your own investigation, by all means do. And as Lori said, we will be presenting not only the issues with wireless and the science, but what we can do to get to safe technology. So my name is Cece Doucette, Massachusetts for Safe Technology. And this little MTPW after my name just means that I have the privilege of earning a master's in technical and professional writing from Northeastern University. And never in a million years did I imagine I would use this skill set to do technology safety work, but here we are. So this little sign over here is our best practices for mobile devices that we adopted way back in 2014 after our schools took a look at the wireless issue. So we advise to turn off the devices when we're not using them. The industry would prefer to have all Wi-Fi all the time, but knowing the facts, we recognize that common sense dictates that that's a pretty dangerous position to put ourselves and our children in. Turn Wi-Fi on only when needed instead of letting it pulsate at us all the time. Always place the device on a solid surface other than our bodies, because as we'll see in a moment, there's a lot of damage that can happen by putting a radio frequency radiation transmitter on our bodies. And so we became the first in the nation back in 2014 to do that. When I got deeper into the science, I kept thinking, wow, what are we doing here and why don't we know and how can we tell people? So I worked with my legislators in Massachusetts starting in 2014, and we've made some important inroads here, but it's truly New Hampshire that is leading the nation today. And we'll talk you through what their current legislative efforts are. And on this journey, I had the privilege of being introduced to some folks in Europe who were investigating this issue. And they realized that we can't fix it until people know about it. And so I partnered with them and one of the scientists in Europe, Dr. Mikko Ahonen out of Finland. And together we have built simple, easy online training that can be administered in about a half an hour online. So we could literally train an entire school, an entire workforce in about a half an hour on your lunch break. So we've got off-the-shelf training ready to go. We're beta testing a new platform right now, but we anticipate going live next week. So just know we have solutions at every turn on this issue. It's just a matter of helping to shift our mindset from the convenience of all Wi-Fi all the time to safe, responsible, sustainable technology. And when I first fell down the rabbit hole back in 2013, I was literally the only person I could find to talk to about this. And at that juncture, I wasn't even really sure what it was that I was telling myself. But then in 2015 or 16, Dr. Deborah Davis, who's a world leading expert on this, she founded the Environmental Health Trust. She is a Nobel Peace Prize co-laureate on climate change, one of our literally country's highest scientists. And when she figured out the wireless issue, she's been all over it ever since. And she brought a team of world leading experts to our State House back in the summer of, I think, I want to say 2016, maybe. And I was invited to go to that, and it was just so gratifying to go to our State House, be in one of our big rooms that were standing room only of people all over the Commonwealth of Massachusetts who already understood this issue. So that's where I was able to connect with others. And ultimately, we established Massachusetts for Safe Technology, where you can go to look at the science, to look at the state efforts that we've been working on, and also to find solutions for how to get to safe technology. Now, I like to share this link for the Health in Buildings Roundtable Conference that was held at the National Institutes of Health. I was so honored to be asked to co-chair that. And with me on my panel was Dr. Martin Paul, who's one of the leading scientific experts on this issue. Frank Clegg, who's the retired president of Microsoft Canada, he figured all this out after he retired. And now in his retirement, bless him, he could just be sitting back and enjoying a cushy retirement. But he has founded Canadians for Safe Technology, and he and his colleagues up in Canada are trying to do what we're trying to do down here. That is to protect our towns and to give the public the right to know. So I like to include this link because it was highly credible. And the lectures that we gave were under 10 minutes each. So for people just joining the conversation, this is a highly credible, short way for people to quickly come up to speed on this issue. And then as the years went by, we realized we had such a gap because far too many people are getting sick. And most of them are being misdiagnosed because most of our doctors and our nurses and our first responders and other healthcare practitioners have never been taught to recognize, diagnose, treat, and most importantly, prevent these microwave radiation sicknesses. So in 2019, the first medical conference was held in the US, and then Libby Kelly, and that was by Dr. Lynn Patrick. And then in 2021, Elizabeth Kelly, who founded the International EMF Scientists Appeal to the World Health Organization and the United Nations, Libby and others, we worked really hard to get this new conference done. And it has been reaccredited so that anybody, anywhere in the world can go and take professional training with world-leading scientists, doctors, public health experts, and advocates to be trained in microwave sicknesses. So when we're talking about wireless radiation, the term that most people recognize is wireless radiation. When we look at it in the science, we see it as radio frequency radiation or microwave radiation, or EMFs, which is electromagnetic fields. Those are the pulsations of microwave radio frequency that are coming and going between our devices and whatever they're connecting to with a router or a cell tower. So until June 15th, anybody who needs professional training for licensed practitioners and our first responders also need continuing medical education credits. They can register by June 15th and complete the training on their own time by July 1st, and there are 24.5 continuing medical education credits available. I really encourage every one of you to go out to Massachusetts for Safe Technology, go to our website on the events page, and you will see a letter that we have there for you to print out and take to your doctors and your dentists as you have your regular appointments. And we've also got a letter or a way for you to print out the International Association of Firefighters. They had a position statement as far back as I think it was 2004, saying that the science looks like there's harm there, and until it's proven safe, we do not consent to having cell towers on our fire stations, because firefighters out in Santa Barbara, California, were trying to respond to a crises in their community. And because a cell tower had been put in front of their station to reach a multi-lane highway behind the station, they were getting blasted by these nonstop pulsations of toxic microwave radiation, and their firefighters became neurologically damaged. And one of the presenters at the EMF Medical Conference was Dr. Gunnar Hauser, who did the brain scans, the functional MRIs, and saw the damage to the gray matter of their brain. And they literally went to go respond in their community and couldn't remember how to properly do protocol to get on their fire trucks. Once they got on them, they couldn't remember how to get to these locations in their community that they've been servicing for decades. So, and then when they got there, they couldn't remember how to properly administer emergency protocols. So that's why the IAFF came up with this position statement that is still on their website. Unfortunately, some of the higher ups, as we've seen in too many instances, are seduced by the financial incentives that the industry gives, perhaps $1 million fire truck here and there. And so they have not protected their rank and file on the ground. So even our firefighters need to understand this information. They may very well recognize the symptoms in themselves once we help them to see it. I know my firefighters here in Ashland, Massachusetts were very grateful when I brought down the letter for the conference, and I also brought down the IAFF letter, because they don't have much budget to do any kind of travel for professional training. And so they were grateful that in their off time, they could complete this conference online at their own pace. So again, as disturbing as this issue is, we have solutions at every turn. So how did my schools become the first in the United States to even have our little sign hanging in our classrooms, right? Little sign. So I think it was when they read the legal fine print. So I invite anybody with us today who has an iPhone on you to please take it out and go into settings. This information exists in all of our devices, but I know how to walk you through quickly to the iPhone. If you don't have an iPhone, you are more than welcome to go out to this link to see the fine print. And like right here in the Apple iPads, it has said, watch out for seizures, blackouts, eye strain. And who knew that before we handed every child in our country a tablet to access their education wirelessly? So once you're in an iPhone, in settings, scroll down just a little ways and hit general. From general, on a really old phone, you would hit about, but most folks have upgraded to a newer phone. So from general, go all the way down to legal and regulatory. And to remember how to get back here, you can remember the acronym GAL, like this gal taught us where to find this. Once you're in legal and regulatory, about 4 down from the top, you'll see RF exposure. That's radio frequency, microwave radiation, that they politely call energy in this legal fine print disclaimer. And when we take a moment to read that, it gives us 2 really important cautionary statements. One, this device was tested at a distance from the body. So if you're putting it up to your body or your brain or your breast, in your bra, in your waistband, in your back pocket, you are exceeding the FCC guidelines for public radiation exposure. And those guidelines, by the way, were never biologically safety tested. In a subsequent paragraph, they recommend that you use a hands-free option like speakerphone, or sometimes they give you a headset with your device. But there are some properties about this radiation that we should know about. It likes metal. Metal amplifies this radiation. So if you have a regular wire headset that you're plugging into a transmitting device, and then that radiation runs up the wire and right into your brain. But again, we have solutions. You want to look for something called an air tube. I'll stop sharing for just a second to show you this. You want to look for something called an air tube or a hollow tube headset. See how this just has rubber tips, plastic tubing that carries the data or the sound up to your head, kind of like a doctor's stethoscope. So you get good acoustics. It's got volume control and muting, and these little ferrite beads block the radiation signal from going up to your brain. It's got a nice long cord so you can plug it into your device and set that device as far away from you while it's transmitting. And while it's transmitting, only use the one antenna in your settings that you need. If it's a phone call, turn off the Wi-Fi, turn off the Bluetooth, turn off the locator, turn off the hotspot. Otherwise, each one of those antennas is constantly pulsing microwave radiation to make or maintain a handshake with an air cell tower or router. And again, the message, as Lori said, is not no technology, but safe technology. And these little tips will get us one step closer to that. So when we discovered all this science, and then I learned that there are scientific devices that can help us to see and hear this invisible toxin, because most of us don't feel it, although more and more people are feeling it because it's cumulative with dose exposure. So right now in my home, when I turn on my radio frequency broadband detection meter, you see it's blinking in the green there. That's as good as we can get today. And right now, the maximum spike of radiation in my space is 3.8, so just under 4. Remember that number 4. The unit of measurement is something called a microwatt per square meter. So basically, in about 3 feet of air, how much radiation am I being exposed to? In the scientific literature, they want us to be at 10 or less in indoor spaces. So we're just under 4 in my house because I figured this out. I stopped circling my tail, and I eventually hardwired every single thing in my house. And we'll teach you a little bit more about what hardwiring even means. So as a rule, I keep my phone in airplane mode. And then when I need to do something, when I'm out on the go, I take it out of airplane mode. Turn that noise down a little bit, but see how it's now flashing in the red. That's the extreme level of microwave radiation from this one device. And I am not even doing anything other than letting those antennas pulsate. So I prefer not to radiate myself. So I'm going to take this, oh geez, I'm going to take this back into airplane mode. And within a few seconds, it dissipates. And look at that beautiful green without any background noise pollution from this. So although it's invisible, our poor cells are hearing and feeling that all the time, and it creates a lot of stress. So remember, we were at 4 microwatts per square meter, and by simply turning on the antennas in my cell phone, we went from 4, we want to be at 10 or less, to 2,050,000 microwatts per square meter, 2 million, and we want to be under 10. So that's how much electrosmog we are now surrounding ourselves with, unless we know better and choose better. So I'm going to go back in to my screen share and pick up where we left off. So, you know, when I was learning about this, my brain goes right towards solutions. So we know we have a problem, it's invisible, so let's measure it, gather our data, and see what steps we can take to remediate. And then I used to be the grant coordinator for our school district, and I knew we had a pot of money in our town that got redistributed out through grants. So I went after a grant, and I'll tell you, that was not easy because nobody in my town had any idea what I was talking about when I brought up this radiation problem. So I learned that I had to go and educate people. So one by one, I educated every member of our select board, which held the purse strings for that grant fund. And the first time I did, I just simply submitted my application and hoped they would give me funding to put a meter in our schools and a meter in our library. And they denied my grant and said, come back next time. We really don't know what you're talking about here. So I waited the next time and I resubmitted my grant application full of science and all the good stuff we need to teach them. And they're like, oh, gee, you know, we're the select board. Maybe it's really a Board of Health issue. Well, I had already talked to our Board of Health agent, and he'd been around back in the 90s when the cell towers were coming in. And when those cell towers were coming in, the industry started literally wining and dining our public servants and taking them out to dinners and fancy hotels to tout the huge benefits of cell phones. And if anybody brought up the wireless, you know, radiation issues, they would say, oh, gee, you know, the FCC says this is all within the limits. And by the way, you can't sue because this is going in. So I knew that our Board of Health was kind of in the dark. And then I introduced a bill in Massachusetts. And when I was testifying before the Joint Committee on Public Health, I'm holding up the science. I'm holding up our, you know, little sign for Ashland, and I'm holding up my meter showing the radiation. And I could tell by looking at the eyes of every member of our Joint Committee on Public Health that not one person on that board had any idea that this was so dangerous. So I thought, gosh, I'm going to have to get in there and educate one by one. So I started meeting with our legislative offices. And as I would sit with them for a half hour, an hour, and show them the facts, I thought, gosh, maybe it's worth it to take some more time and double back to my town. And then I requested meetings individually with each member of our select board. And one by one, I taught them what this is. And one of them was a retired police officer. And he said to me, Cece, you had me at hello, because too many of his brethren on the force had gotten the brain tumors from having these radar guns. This is radar. That's where it started, was with our military during the war, World War II or one. But they had that radar gun mounted at the back of the car, blasting their brains. I worked with another friend in the schools whose husband was a police officer, and she was telling me that a lot of the cops were getting thigh cancers because they were holding the radar guns on their thighs. So you never know who's going to know something about this. Our local town manager at that time used to be a fighter pilot for our government, and he said that our government still checks in with him to see if he's had any fallout from the radiation being up in the, you know, so close, so far away from the earth, where the natural electromagnetic fields are so high, plus all the radiation in and on the plane. So you might get lucky and find a person or two in your community who understands this. But it took me 3 tries and literally one by one educating people on what this is. And then when I resubmitted my application, we became the first in the United States to pilot this program to put a radiation detection meter on loan in our library. So now anybody in Ashland, Massachusetts can show their library card and take this out for a week and measure their homes and measure their schools and measure their offices and their cars and their recreation areas, anywhere they spend time, and just do the gap analysis. Okay, well, gee, we're in the red. What can we do step by step to reduce that? So when we had that first medical conference out in California in 2019, flew all the way out to California and met a doctor from there, Dr. Judy Safrir, who's a holistic adult and child psychiatrist here in Massachusetts. So Dr. Safrir and I went after a grant from the state cultural council, and they give a pot of money to every town to go towards science and arts and, you know, all sorts of wonderful cultural programs. So we got a grant to screen the award-winning film Generation Zapped and to put one of these meters on loan in their public library. And now Pittsfield, Massachusetts has also, through their own budget, put this one that I just showed you, the Safe and Sound Pro 2 meter. This is the one that in the 2021 medical conference was recommended. Both of these are fine meters. They're both in the same, just under $400 price category. This one's just a little bit more modern, and it also has a jack in it, so you could plug it into the wall using, what I was using was my cell phone charger. It was the same port. So it's just got a little bit more advanced technology, but they're both great meters. So others around the country, it's so exciting when people reach out and say, wow, thanks so much for thinking about doing that library program. We're showing Generation Zapped. We're putting these meters on loan, so now everybody in our community can gather the data. Some people like to buy the meter themselves. That's fine. Somebody like Lori, I know she partnered with her neighbors. They all chipped in and got the meter, and now they pass it back and forth. So again, solutions at every turn. So let's see if we can measure it and then see what happens. And one of the last bastions of independent reporting in our community are our local cable stations. So mine, WACA, has been so gracious to help me get word out to my community. We've done interviews, I've done public service announcements, and they came to my house and we filmed this 23-minute public service announcement where I do a walkthrough of all the common exposures that so many of us have in our homes today, and measure and show the radiation coming out of it, and then offer solutions for how we can take charge of this once we make the mind shift from all Wi-Fi all the time convenience to even better technology by simply running our signals through wires again. So anytime we run our signals through the air, the quality is poor. As soon as you plug it back into your router, run an Ethernet cable from the back of your router to your device and go into your devices and turn off all the antennas in the settings, you're going to get a screaming fast signal. It's going to be far more reliable. It's going to save you energy because wireless consumes 10 times more energy than simply choosing hardwired solutions. And it's far more sustainable and future-proof. And your data's better cared for and your privacy is better cared for when everything goes under your control through a wire. So who knew you can actually buy little dongles that would hardwire that iPhone? There are others that you can get for, you know, the Google phones or the Androids, but always check your make and model to make sure there is an adapter. So again, not rocket science to fix this, but who would know unless we get to help educate. So thank you again for joining us tonight. So that's what my journey has been. And I want to share with you next what we do find when we take the time to look at the independent, peer-reviewed, published science. And I didn't know the terms independent and peer-reviewed when I got started, but that means that they bring other experts in on their science and say, hey, look at this for us, and does it pass muster? So these are studies that have been done in highly credentialed, highly credible scientific journals. So what does the science tell us for long-term effects? Child and adult cancers. This study over here is from the National Toxicology Program, which is the gold standard on toxics research in the world, and it's here in the United States as part of the National Institutes of Health, the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences. And they spent 20 years investigating whether cell phones could harm us. Think about 20 years ago, cell phones were the technology of the day. And they went under the theory that they must be fine because, of course, they're being marketed all over our world. Well, after they did the deep dive into the science, in their final report, they determined clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage and a bunch of other effects. And anytime a good study comes out, the industry, first of all, they own most of mainstream media, or if they don't own it outright, their advertising revenue is so potent that journalists today can't do true investigative journalism on this in mainstream channels. Sometimes we get a story out, but then it falls off. So the industry will spin it and say, oh, that NTP study, that's just one study. You need more than one study. And this buys them time to keep peddling their toxic products. Well, right on the heels of this NTP study, Italy's Ramazzini Institute came out with another large study on cell towers. So now we've got both ends of the transmission, the phones and the towers, and they corroborated everything in their findings that we found here in the United States. So we don't need more science. That's another common dodge that they do is, oh, we need more science. Well, not being a scientist myself, I've come to learn that with every scientific study that gets published, there's always refinements that can be done, always more investigation that can be done. And that's where folks going for their PhDs go to look at the end of those studies to see what they might do their thesis on. So you can always say, oh, more science is needed, but we don't need more science to know. We need to get on this and to fix it now. Okay, so child and adult cancers, DNA damage, which we know is the roadmap to grow a proper anything from a fetus to a plant to an animal in every biome that we have in our environment. It was the infertility studies that actually got me on my feet when I first started looking at the actual peer-reviewed science. And they had taken male human sperm, they exposed it to a laptop with the antennas radiating, and those antennas changed the DNA, slowed the motility of the sperm, and caused far fewer sperm to be viable in just 4 hours of exposure to this man-made energy. And I went, you got to be kidding me. I have 2 daughters. My oldest had just gone up to college and, of course, took her MacBook with her, which she's using right on top of her reproductive organs. And my youngest had just gone into high school, and for Christmas, we had given her a laptop to use to access her education. So that is the day that I found my voice on this issue and got my shaking little knees to strengthen up and say, we have got to do something about this. So the infertility, we now have studies on women's exposure and how it can cause miscarriages. And there's sadly far too much science on this. Neurotoxicity, look at what we've done to ourselves in the last 2 to 3 decades. We are seeing ADD, ADHD like we have never seen before. Same with Alzheimer's, same with autism. And Dr. Hugh Taylor runs the OBGYN program at Yale Medical, and he has done some of the scientific investigation through rodent studies and sees that when you expose the pregnant mice to this radiation, the mice, the babies, the pups come out bouncing off the walls of their cage, just like not a care in the world, like a kid with attention deficit order disabilities. Dr. Martha Herbert founded the Autism Lab at Massachusetts General Hospital, and she sees huge connections between the families in her care and what we know happens with this microwave radiation exposure. She sees it as the brain gets to a tipping point, and then you fall somewhere into that spectrum. But sometimes when we remove those exposures, we can see unbelievable improvements. When we did that Health and Buildings Roundtable Conference at the NIH back in 2018, one of the gentlemen I invited to fly out for our panel was Peter Sullivan, who he too was a former fighter pilot, and Peter got really sick. He started dropping weight, his teeth were getting brittle, and he didn't know what was going on. And he was a Silicon Valley engineer after he left his years of service. Like, his friends invented the cell phone. So he lived in this world, and he certainly didn't think there was anything wrong with wireless until his health crashed, and he made the connection somehow that radiation could be a main contributing factor. And then Peter had 2 little boys. And as they came of the preschool years, both of his sons were diagnosed on the autism spectrum. So Peter did with his wife what most people will do when they have a loved one on the autism spectrum. You start peeling it back and you remove the toxic food sources. You go to an organic diet. Some will go so far as to remove the heavy metals from the body. And like I said, metal attracts and amplifies radiation, so that's a really good solution. But today, Peter will tell us that's all good and important for any of us. But today, do the digital detox. And we see that his 2 boys, who are now grown men, neither of his sons are on the autism spectrum anymore. And I had never heard anybody say that that was actually reversible. So I don't want to give false hope, because all of our bodies are very individual. But when we remove these environmental exposures, we see a lot of really beautiful recovery happening. And those might be for de novo mutations, which means the autism didn't come from mom's genetic history or from dad's genetic history. So there is hope. And once we know, we can pluck up the courage to start reducing these exposures, but especially protect your sleep. That's when the body does its magic on our circadian rhythm and does the cell repair and regeneration. So if you take one thing away today, start protecting your sleep. Okay. Dr. Martin Pall came up with a study this spring showing the Alzheimer's statistics. And just like with cancer, it used to take decades for these diseases to start showing. Now, because of these upticks in all these environmental exposures, we are now seeing autism setting in at earlier and earlier ages. It's not just 70 and 80-year-olds now, 60s, 50s, 40s, 30s, and in rare cases, we are seeing autism in people in their 20s. So we have to get ahead of this. We can't just let these industries continue to pollute our world. And, you know, for the longest time, it's been so hard to open this conversation, and we're so very grateful when other environmental protection groups start taking on the wireless issue. And in the last year or so, the Environmental Working Group has received resources to have somebody on staff whose priority is wireless radiation. So EWG, I first found them as a mom because they had done a lot of good work on pesticides in our food stream. And I learned about them first through their Dirty Dozen and Clean 15. They put out these lists of foods you could probably buy conventionally grown, where the chemicals from the soil and the spraying are not penetrating the food quite so deeply. And then they've got their Dirty Dozen that they list every year that, yeah, we've checked these out every year, and you should really try and buy them organically or skip them if you can't find organic foods. So I was already a fan of EWG, and now they are coming up with articles and scientific reviews to educate everybody who has signed up with their databases. So here's an example: protecting kids from wireless radiation in school and in home. They tell us what to do: use airplane mode, hardwire, you know, don't put a wireless headset or earbuds up to your brain. Never put anything on your body. So they've got great solutions, and everything is backed up with science. They've also done one on the nervous system and what that does to us if we continue to radiate ourselves with this microwave radiation. So a big shout out to the Environmental Working Group. And Dr. Om Gandhi is one of the scientists, and he and others are showing us the science that we really have to protect our children because they're not just little people. Their bodies are biologically still under construction, their DNA, their immune system, their central nervous system. And when we look at this modeling, these are all mannequin heads turned sideways with the yellow part being the ear. So when you put a cell phone up to the ear of your brain or mine, it is penetrating microwave radiation into our brain about a third of the way through. And that's why oftentimes you'll see brain tumors develop right on the same side of the head that people hold the cell phone. When you put a cell phone up to the brain of a 10-year-old child, look at this, it penetrates about 3/4 of the way into the child's brain. And on a 5-year-old child, look at this, it's going almost all the way into that entire brain. And we know scientifically why that is. A child's skull is thinner and their brain has a higher water content, and water vibrates and does damage with that microwave radiation, just like it heats our food in a microwave oven. But the microwave oven isn't sitting there pulsing all the time like our routers and our Roku and our Chromecast and, you know, all the things we've been sweet talked into the benefits of without being given the facts on the harms. So we must commit to protecting our children. So those were the long-term effects. In the short term, many people with just a little bit of education like these sessions we're doing come to recognize that, oh my gosh, you mean since 2002, the Americans with Disabilities Act has already recognized this term, electromagnetic sensitivities? They have. They just never acted on it to do anything meaningful for everybody in our society. So, but things are changing. Libby Kelly had worked with the ADA back in 2002 on this. And we may have a guest with us tonight who's with our government today, who's working on this today and has brought Libby in along with other experts like Dr. Magda Havas, Sheena Symington, and Susan Malloy to really educate on this and see if we can move the needle through our disabilities rights and get this right. So for many people, once they learn about insomnia, they come back time and again and say, Cece, I didn't want to know about this. I didn't want to hear about it, but I'll be darned if I didn't recognize some of these symptoms in myself or in my loved ones. And the insomnia is a huge one. So we now know scientifically what's happening. And the industry has always spun it again, saying, oh, there's no mechanism of harm identified in the scientific literature, so let's just keep doing what we're doing. Well, they can't say that anymore. Well, they still say that, but they're wrong. One of the mechanisms of harm that's documented is that in the wee hours of darkness, our circadian rhythm, which operates on the natural light cycle. So we should be getting out and getting natural daylight on our eyes every morning to regulate that. And then in the wee hours of darkness, the pineal gland in the brain would release melatonin normally. Melatonin would go in and not only regulate our sleep cycle, but it would also help to clear toxins of the day out through the bloodstream. Well, now that we've introduced this man-made invisible light energy, microwave radiation, it's a light energy form pulsating at our poor brains all night long. And if we choose to leave it on, our brain thinks the lights are on. And so it doesn't properly release the melatonin to go in and do its job. So insomnia is a big gain that people get ahead of when they start turning everything off at night. Headaches, stabbing, searing headaches, migraines. My own daughter in high school got an optical migraine. And what child should be getting a migraine and nosebleeds? When I stopped circling my tail and decided, okay, mom duty here, we've got to hardwire our house, my daughter's headaches and nosebleeds all but disappeared. She was still getting exposed at school, But by the grace of God, in our own home, she was safe unless she let herself get too dehydrated, and then she might get a headache or a nosebleed. But we saw drastic improvement in that. Chronic fatigue, where you just don't have your get up and go anymore. This causes oxidative stress. That's a fancy way for saying the oxygen's not getting up to your organs because this radiation is causing oxidative stress and mitochondrial damage. So when I was learning about this, I learned that there's something called the rouleau effect, which in my little brain sounds a lot like that candy Rolos. And I used to love those when I was still eating junk food. But those were the caramel chocolates that were stacked up in a stack. And now we see that when this electromagnetic radiation hits our red blood cells, it can cause these free-floating red blood cells that are cruising along and oxygenating all of our organs and systems. It can cause these red blood cells to start glomming up. So they look like a chain of these deformed bottle cap blood cells that can no longer get to where they need to go to oxygenate your blood and mine. So it's no wonder we have chronic fatigue. We have pain from unidentified sources. There's another finding in the scientific literature that deals with our skin. As it turns out, we have like little tiny antennas all over the surface of our skin, and those react very sensitively to these pulsations of microwave radiation. So some people will tell us about the hot ear they get. Others are getting rashes, tingling, heating, so burning sensations. It does a lot of things when we start messing with our skin, and our skin is talking to all of our other organs. So the industry will say, oh, 5G is okay. It's only penetrating the skin a little bit. Well, hello, that skin is our largest organ, and it's in concert with every other organ in our body. So watch out for what the industry is trying to get you to believe. Depending on what your body is built like, this is known to cause heartbeats that go too fast or too slow, depending on your individual proclivity. And then cognitive impairment, as we discussed with the science, this is a neurotoxin. And as we age, our cognitive abilities naturally decline a bit, but this cognitive impairment is happening to our kids all the way up through our senior citizens. And then one of the most disturbing things I found at the EMF medical conference is more than one of the doctors warned us that these outbursts we are experiencing in our society, like those mass shootings and kids who are losing their cool, adults who are losing their cool, we are changing the gray matter and the white matter of the brain and the centers of the brain that allow us to do proper functioning. When we damage that, they say we can expect to see a lot more of these outbursts than we have ever seen before. Anxiety, depression, like we have never seen before. Even before the pandemic, we were at epidemic proportions of anxiety and depression. Turn off the wireless radiation. So I'll quickly go through, it's not just you and I, as I mentioned, it's every biological cell and every biome on our planet. Our poor pollinators and our birds, they have built-in systems with magnetite and other things in their beaks and in their brains that allow them to be in sync with the Earth's natural electromagnetic field. That resonates at Schumann's resonance, which is 7.83 hertz. And now when we're using our devices, we are in the megahertz and gigahertz range. That's millions and billions of times pulsing these electromagnetic fields at us. And we're supposed to be at 7.83, and so are our pollinators. So we have gotten ourselves and our pollinators and our birds and everything growing out there into a real pickle because we are overpowering our own systems. For those concerned with climate change, thank you, and thank you for anything you might be doing on that front. As I mentioned, this consumes 10 times more energy through wireless systems than if we would all just transition to hardwired technology. There was a Greenpeace analyst back a decade ago that said if the cloud were a country, it would be the 5th largest consumer of energy in the world. And that was 10 years ago. And look at how much more we have layered on since then. You don't even want to know about what's going on down in the Congo and elsewhere, and the human atrocities to extract the many, many different minerals that go into every single one of our technology devices. If we understood that, and thank you to Katie Singer for all the work she does on this, we would never throw these devices aside just to get the shiny object that they're pushing at us now. We would use these things to their full and useful life and not feel compelled to upgrade because there's some new bell or whistle that the industry wants to make money on. So we need to be mindful of that. The data warehouses, the networks, our personal devices, constantly streaming uses huge amounts of data. Start by downloading and then turning off all the antennas. Once it's downloaded to your device, you can enjoy whatever's on your device without the radiation. Every time we send and receive, every time we charge, with all these apps they've talked us into putting on our devices that honestly most of us rarely use, those are constantly using energy to update in the background. Every time we send and receive, we're using energy. Every time we charge and recharge our devices every single day, we're using energy. So once that's pointed out, let's make a choice. Let's not use these wireless devices unless we have to in an emergency on the go. And let's start taking baby steps toward the responsible technology of fiber optics to and through the premises. So when I fell down the rabbit hole with this, one of the biggest things that had me perplexed is, if this is as bad as what I'm reading, little me, that I can figure out in the scientific literature, why don't we know about this? And then 2 years later, Harvard's Law School Center for Ethics came out with this incredible report. It's free and online. Anybody can go read this. 59 pages, called Captured Agency: How the Federal Communications Commission is Dominated by the Industries it Presumably Regulates. They're the ones who are supposed to be protecting us. They have no expertise. The only thing they do is regulate who gets to have spectrum and make sure that one telecom doesn't cheat the other. Look at this graphic that they chose. I love it. It's a revolving door, and sadly, that's what's happened with many of our federal agencies. They are no longer public servants. They are now looking after the interests of the industries, and many of the commissioners come from industry, right? When I fell down the rabbit hole, it was Tom Wheeler. He used to run the Wireless Industry Association, and before that, he ran the Cable Industry Association, and then he grew up to be in charge of the FCC. And then after him came Ajit Pai, who is the commissioner, the chairman of the FCC, and he was a senior attorney from Verizon. So we still have several of our commissioners are from industry, and we're trying to get others who might actually represent the public instead of industry. There was another excellent article that just came out on November from ProPublica, which is an independent journal outlet. Remember, I said mainstream media can't cover this because they're too tied monetarily to the industry. I love that we're seeing parallel alternatives developing all over our world for all of the environmental pollutants that we've got going on. So thank you to ProPublica, who just did an expose how the FCC shields cell phone companies from safety concerns. And they did the deep dive and brought it current from Harvard's 2015 report. And then just in this last month, ProPublica also came out with this amazing article that shows what they did to the Girl Scouts. Ericsson is a European telecom company on the equipment side. They have a headquarters in Texas, and they went to the East Texas Girl Scout Council and gave them some money, and then partnered with them to create a 5G badge to hook the little girls and their families and their leaders on 5G. And in a minute, we're going to tell you why 5G is really, really dangerous. So thank you to the independent journalists who are getting word out there. And remember, I said our national toxicology program had done this groundbreaking $30 million study that concluded clear evidence of cancer, DNA damage, and more. That study 20 years ago was commissioned by the Food and Drug Administration. Once those findings came out, that was supposed to trigger public policy to protect you and I. But instead, the guy who's in charge of the FDA radiation stuff today is Dr. Jeffrey Shuren. And Dr. Shuren went to the FCC and said, we don't actually believe that study, so you just keep doing what you're doing today. And one might say, well, what would ever possess Dr. Shuren to do that? Well, when you look, and you don't have to look very far, you see that Dr. Shuren is married to an attorney who's a partner in a law firm that represents, guess who? The wireless industry. So big Wi-Fi, big pharma, big agra, big chemical. So we're in trouble with our federal agencies, but in a moment, I'll tell you why we have hope in those arenas too. So sadly, this corruption goes all the way up to the World Health Organization. If you just, and we've seen this happen time and again, we'll be talking to somebody like I've been presenting in meetings and they'll go and say, well, the World Health Organization says it's fine and there's no consensus, right? Well, first of all, if you know anything about science, there's never a consensus. So you look at the weight of the evidence, right? But when you go out there, there's still this old stuff that pops up first in these searches that leaves you to believe the World Health Organization thinks everything's fine. Those are old. And who would know there's two groups at the World Health Organization. One of them is heavily industry tied, and the other is the independent scientists who are trying to get the truth out. And because of those Italian and American studies that showed clear evidence of cancers, that provided a missing piece. We were missing that piece in 2011 when the World Health Organization determined that this electromagnetic radiation is a group 2B possible human carcinogen. What was missing were those animal studies. Now we have them. And there's a call to action for the WHO to reclassify this as a known human carcinogen. So they have a new open investigation, which you can get to through this link. You may not find it doing your own search because it's been buried and we found it and we dug it back out. But yeah, the corruption goes all the way to the top. But here it is. This is their reopening. We've got that for you. So that, my friends, is all the bad news. Now let's spend the rest of our time. I'll speak for another few minutes and we're going to talk about solutions. So we want to learn to control what you and I today have control over. And it's not rocket science to fix. As I said, it definitely requires a mind shift on all we've been sold about convenience. So let's set a new goal. Let's keep our awesome technology and take baby steps to get to safe and responsible technology. So somewhere in your house, in your office, in the systems in your schools, you've got a router. On the back of the router, there are little holes. Those are Ethernet ports. And with the Ethernet ports, you just plug in a nice long Ethernet cable and run it to wherever you use your technology. Most of us today have more than one thing that we want to plug into the internet. So who knew? You can get like a little tiny, think of it as an extension cord for electronics. It's called an Ethernet switch. And it's short money, folks. This one has 5 ports and, they're little tiny things, so they're not going to create big things. It's just this is how big it is. So then you get a little Ethernet cord to plug it into the holes. So this one plugs in here on one end, then you plug the other end in here, and then you start plugging in all your devices. In a classroom, you could get an Ethernet switch that has like 30 of these holes in it and plug in 30 different devices. So you then just buy an individual cable for each one of your devices. This is what we did for the iPhone. And you plug it into your device and then you go in and turn off the antennas. And who knew you can actually forward your cell phone calls to your landline? And then it will go into voicemail if nobody picks up. So again, we can fix this, you guys. It's not rocket science. So you can do the same thing for your tablets and your laptops and, you know, your gaming systems, whatever. Always choose a hardwired connection as your first step. And then step 2 is to turn off the antennas. When I figured all this out and I finally, you know, bit the bullet and did this in my house, I'm sorry, my husband, my sweet man, is in there emptying the dishwasher and cooking us dinner. So sorry for any background noises. But I called up my internet service provider, who was Verizon at the time. And I said, okay, we're choosing to have hardwired technology because it's faster and safer. But when I measure the triple play thing that's in my utility closet for internet, for phone, for cable, it's sending my meter off into the red zone. How do I turn those antennas off? Because I couldn't find a button on that thing. They said, oh, that's easy, ma'am. Sit down at your computer. So I sat down at my computer. He told me what my internet service address was. And then he taught me how to sign into my account. And once I was in my online account, all I had to do was go into wireless settings and see what was there. Well, there was a 2.4 gigahertz antenna in my router, and there was a 5 gigahertz antenna in my router. All I had to do was go off, apply. And then I got a message like, you know, you're turning off everybody's Wi-Fi. And I'm like, yes, thank you. And then once I did that, I waited a minute or two, and then I brought my meter down and literally radio silence. So I fixed it. And then my husband, you know, he's a financial planner, so his world makes sense in terms of dollars and cents, and I respect that. He saw a better deal with Comcast. And so he called up Comcast and said, you know, hey, we're tempted to switch from Verizon. If you can guarantee that when you come in and switch out the boxes in our home, that there will be no radio frequency. And they said, no problem, we can turn that off. So the installer comes over and he switches out the router, he switches out our cable boxes and spends a couple hours. And I said, okay, humor me. And I take my little radiation detection meter down back to my utility closet and I turn it on and it flies into the red zone. And I said, okay, so you turned off the 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz antennas, right? And he said, yeah, ma'am, I did. And I said, and I understand that Comcast is putting public hotspots on the router that you're putting in my home and using my electricity to throw signal out to the curb so people passing by can grab signal off of my home, which, by the way, slows down my internet service. And I said, did you turn off the 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz hotspots? He said, yeah, actually, ma'am, I did. And another one of the installers I talked to in his truck one day said, yeah, you know, when I go and do an installation, don't tell my boss, but I actually turn off those hotspots because we get far too many calls when we install these new routers that it's draining their service. So the guy in my basement tells me, yeah, we turned off all 4 of those antennas. I said, so why are we still going into the red zone? What is still transmitting in there? And he says, I don't know. And he called his tech support. He called his supervisor. They had no clue. So he said, I'm going to leave and bring my supervisor back tomorrow and we're going to figure this out. Well, after I thought about it, I thought, you know what? I remember Peter Sullivan at the medical conference when we were sitting down for lunch. I kind of sat down at a conversation that was already happening. And I remember him saying there was another antenna in there. So I reached out to Peter and I said, Peter, what was that? And he went, oh, it's a home security antenna, a wireless antenna for wireless home security. And whether you have that product or service or not, they just put these things in your house pulsating all the time. And I went, oh, and he said, yeah, and even the frontline tech support don't know about this. So you would have to ask to get to a tier 2 tech support person, which I think is an engineer. And from their end, they could go online into your router and turn off that 5th antenna. And I went, whoa, I know that these devices do updates in the middle of the night. What's to say that even if they turn everything off today, that they're not going to turn it all back on? And I'm going to be sitting here in my office at home feeling wonky again because I'm getting bombarded with microwave radiation. So again, my sweet husband went down to the electronics store that night and bought our own router. It was a Netgear something or other. And so the next day when the installer and his supervisor came back, they couldn't figure it out. And I said, well, I think I know the solution. And I told them about this tier 2 tech support that you need to get to turn off that home security antenna. And I said, we're not willing to take that chance that it's all going to turn itself back on again, which you really got to stay on top of this equipment, because time and again, people tell me I'm electrically sensitive and all of a sudden I got really sick again, and their computer or their router did an update without their knowing it and they got really sick. So we all have to stay on top of it. So I said, I'm not willing to risk my family's health as a show of good faith. Would you be so kind as to just install our router for us? And they said, absolutely. And these Comcast guys were great. And they just installed our router. So that's what we've been using. So we know how to fix this, but it is, like I said, it's critically important to get a hold of an antenna so you can measure. Because with the Internet of Things and 5G, they now want to put an antenna in every electronic that you buy, from the iPotty. So as a child is sitting there potty training, they can entertain themselves with a tablet stuck on their potty seat. They've developed a little pod that you can put on your baby's diaper that will tell you if your child has soiled itself. I'm like, come on, folks, pick up the baby and do the sniff test like we all did. You don't need for your diaper module to send a signal to your phone to tell you that your baby has soiled yourself. There's something wrong with parenting if you're relying on technology at that level when you should be actively engaging with your child. So it's everywhere. Every electronic device that we're being sold today is coming with one or more of these antennas. And I'll give you an example in my home. My husband found a floor model deal on a new stove, and our old stove was on its last leg. So he gets this new stove delivered, and it's a smart stove. And a girlfriend of mine had a smart stove installed, and we played with hers. And in the settings, we could go in and disable the radio frequency antenna. I guess some people want to be able to turn their oven on from far away. Doesn't sound like a really sound idea, but that's their choice. But I don't want that in my home, and there was no way for me to disable this. So I pull out the manual, and there's a radiation clause in there that says, stay 20 centimeters away from this radiation. And I'm like, isn't that like 8 inches? How am I supposed to cook if I'm 8 inches away from my stove? So it's just ridiculous. So there was nothing in this particular model that allowed me to disable it. So I put in a tech support call. The tech support man shows up, knows nothing about this, didn't want to know anything about the radiation, because I was telling him right now, this stove is radiating at 1,000,090. And when we don't have these antennas on, I keep it under 10 in my house. He got a little huffy with me. So he had to use his cell phone to call his higher tier support. And he said, well, I'll just go out to my van because you don't want radiation. He was kind of huffy with me. And I was like, that's not what I was trying to get at, but whatever you got to do. So he comes back in, he takes off the back panel, and behind the digital display is the motherboard. And mounted right next to the motherboard was this little tiny board. And he just went and unplugged it, and the radiation disappeared. And that's how we fixed my stove. So refrigerators, stoves, coffee pots, everything is coming with these antennas, unless we learn to speak up and tell the manufacturers we don't want it, or at the very least, we want a right to choose. So we know how to do it, but measuring is critically important because it's coming at us from all angles. So take control of the devices, take baby steps. We know it's like drinking water out of a fire hose when you fall down the rabbit hole with this issue. We've been there. We can help you get to safe technology. So control what you have control over. Unfortunately, there are other outside pulsations coming into our spaces that sometimes we don't have control over. The first is the utility smart meters. These are the gas, water, electric, solar, propane meters that are mounted on our homes to allow for billing and to theoretically say if there's a break in service, then the provider will be notified electronically. That's all pretty good, but we shouldn't be doing it with radiation. We should be hardwiring these devices right to the internet in our own buildings to have current modernization of our grid. But unfortunately, when you look at any of your meters, if there's an FCC ID number on it, that tells you that that is pulsing microwave radiation. And the industry will tell you, oh, it's just a couple seconds a day. Well, maybe that's true, maybe it's not. So what do? We measure. When I was testifying with our department, our state level Department of Public Utilities, I put my meter next to my daughter's doll on the wall opposite where these are mounted outside. I have two because we did a solar project here, and then we have the regular electric meter, and the solar comes with, it's a separate meter. So next to the doll's head, I put my meter and I ran a test, and that thing was pulsing microwave radiation 17,000 times a day. So when you have people, children, pregnant women, the elderly, anybody with an existing health condition next to a pulsating meter, or worse, a bank of these on a multi-unit dwelling like an apartment or condo complex. At the EMF medical conference, they said this is where we see a huge increase of people suffering from microwave sicknesses, and when those 5G small cells or close range large cell towers go in. So we need to know what we have, do our gap analysis, but these do pulse radiation continuously. And come on, we could give the industry a nudge, and engineers could make this pulse only once a day until we get to hardwiring them, or only when something breaks on the system. But there's another danger in that this radio frequency likes metal. So now we have cases where the radiation is hopping from this meter onto the house's pipes and wires and virtually turning your whole home into a giant antenna. There's also too many cases documented where these things are not holding up to the power that's coming through them. They're not properly grounded. And we see fires and explosions that are causing very serious damages. And as an expert on this, Susan Foster, has taught us, you can't just grab the hose, and the fire station can't just come and hose that down. They have to go through the energy company and get it killed from their end. Otherwise, if you put water on that, you're going to electrocute yourself. So this is a very big danger in our communities. And then for those who care about data harvesting and privacy issues, when you have radiation carrying your data through the air, some guy in a car with a $20 app, $100 app can be intercepting your data. They can back up their truck. They will know your patterns when you're home, when you're gone, and they can take all your toys. So many risks with allowing the industry to talk our municipalities into their grid modernization plans that use wireless technology. And as we learned here in Worcester and all around the country, as environmental polluters are known to do, they will go into environmental justice communities where people are working 3 jobs just to have a roof and food on the table. They are not paying attention because they can't to what's going on around them. And so these industries come in and do a pilot program where nobody's paying attention and say, look, it was successful here. Now we're going to roll it out in your state. National Grid did that here in Worcester, Massachusetts. They went way over budget, and our Attorney General got involved from the economic side. And then didn't the industry turn around, and National Grid said to New York and to Rhode Island, hey, look how successful this was in Massachusetts. Let's do it in your state too. So that's how they roll. Jeremy Johnson is another Silicon Valley engineer, and he does this amazing TED Talk. So another good, highly credible 15-minute resource to help you open up this conversation, because he's an engineer, his wife's a medical doctor. Both of them got so sick and nothing in her training could get them out of it. Well, a bank of smart meters showed up on their condo. So control what we can control. Start thinking about these smart meters and then look at the other two exposures, the big cell towers and then the small cells that are coming up. So look again to the non-industry funded science, because you'll come up with industry spin anytime you do a search on this. But here in my personal research repository called Understanding EMFs, if you click on this link, it'll come here. And I've got the independent peer-reviewed scientific studies that say you should never, ever have a cell tower within 500 meters of where people are. That's 1,640 feet. That's the minimum. Anybody who's a vulnerable subpopulation, like children, fetuses, pregnant women, the elderly, and anybody with an existing, any kind of health condition, our biological cells only have so much energy, and it's very finely tuned to do normal cell repair and regeneration. When we have these environmental toxins loaded on us all the time, we get easily overwhelmed and our bodies can't keep up. So in the scientific literature, they say you should be at least a quarter mile away from these exposures, and for these vulnerable subgroups, at least a half a mile away. So you can look at the evidence here. And then for the big antennas, there's a website called antennasearch.com that has most of the macro cell or the big cell antennas that look like these up here, that started in cell towers in industrial parks 300 feet up in the air, and then they started encroaching closer and closer. And now they'll slap these up on buildings where there are literally people right on the other side of this massive cell antenna because they can paint it the color of the building. So we need to understand what's around us. Put in any address you like in the US, and it will give you a 3-mile return of where these cell towers and all these antennas are. When I put in our state house here in Massachusetts, it couldn't give me a 3-mile return because there's so much electropollution here. In this 1-mile radius of our state house, there were 70 cell towers. And between the cell towers and the buildings, there were over 1,000 antennas, these big ones, pulsing microwave radiation 24/7 all over Boston. Now add this new layer of technology, the 5G or 5th generation cell towers. The industry is spinning it up that there will be faster data, faster entertainment downloads, smart cities, superhighways. And guess who's buying the entertainment industry? The telecom industry and their parents, so they can push all these streaming services onto you and I. So this is a new add-on. It's not that it's going to replace, yet anyway, the longer wavelengths that are carrying your signals today. Those longer wavelengths can go through your house to get to your device inside. All that's left to monetize are the little dinky waves that are called millimeter waves. And these short little millimeter waves can, carry a lot of data, but they can't carry it very far, and they get derailed by anything in their way. So if you have rain or snow, or if you have trees, 5G is going to get disrupted. So what does the industry want to do? They want to put cell towers every 2 to 12 houses inside your neighborhood and mine in our public access way. They want to give money to our towns to lease the space to put a cell tower at bedroom height in front of your house, your neighbor's house, every 2 to 12 houses, and they are doing it. Look at this map of Boston. So we're already at 1,000 of the big antennas, and every one of these dots is another one of these small cells at curb height, polluting all the people who live and work in Boston. And it's unconscionable that they literally have come in, even under the cover of darkness at night, and lopped off the trees to keep their signals able to access people's phones. If you didn't upgrade to 5G, please don't. You don't need it. Your signal is fine with what you've got with 3G and 4G. But they're clear cutting the trees and decimating our canopies to get their signals through. And the kicker is, this was never safety tested. And Connecticut's US Congressman Richard Blumenthal called out the industry at a commerce hearing a couple of years ago and said, look, share with us how much money, industry, you've invested in independent scientific investigation to be sure this was safe before bringing it to market. And these two industry guys talked in circles and then hemmed and hawed and then ultimately said, we don't actually know of any science that's been done. So Senator Blumenthal says, so basically, as far as health and safety are concerned, we're flying blind here. And that's what the industry does. Push it out, ask questions later. And groups like Computer World are already publishing articles saying 5G is a bad joke. It's not even delivering any of these faster speeds they're promising. 4G is doing the same thing. But look at this. Verizon put out an article in January saying, woohoo, we're now giving 5G to 100 million residents. So this is not a popular bullet that I'm going to talk about next, but we follow the science. Dr. Beverly Rubik, a researcher and a medical doctor, and Dr. Rob Brown, who's a radiologist doctor, they put out this paper showing evidence for a connection between COVID-19 and exposure to radiofrequency radiation, including 5G. So what their facts show here is that in the areas where the industry has pushed 5G in, there are higher cases of COVID and higher death rates. And once we understand that our biological cells only have so much energy, it makes perfect sense. We can't keep up with the cell repair and regeneration. So 5G is a really raw deal for our communities. Dr. Magda Havas recognizes that our governments have by and large dropped the ball, and they are not monitoring this cumulative dose of microwave radiation. So Dr. Havas is asking us to be citizen scientists and use this Safe and Sound Pro 2 meter. And anybody who wants to, when you contact Safe Living Technologies and you say you'd like to participate in Dr. Havas's study, they'll give you a discount of about 25 or 30% on this. So it's usually just under 400. I think I paid just a little over 300 for this meter. And I've taken measurements in many towns around my area. I've gone out with some of our friends here from New Hampshire and we've measured in their communities. And there's protocols, so we all do it the same way for science, and use your little clipboard, and then you go home and you enter this data into Dr. Havas's website. And she retired after 25 years of teaching electromagnetism at Trent University in Canada. So we talk about we want to be at 10 microwatts per square meter indoors. When we're outdoors, the science says, you know, there's no safe level of man-made radiation, but at least outdoors, if you're not hanging out all the time right under one of these towers, if you're on the go, even if it were at 1,000 and you had a clean environment at home, your body can probably cell repair and regenerate. So please consider getting that meter and participating. You can go to globalemf.net. You can see the science on the recommendations of these guidelines. But here's what we're seeing in real time. Our goal outdoors is 1,000 or less. I think maybe Lori measured over at the New Hampshire Fire Department in Westmoreland. It was in the green. Keene at one point was heading up into the yellow. We now know that they've gotten permits to put up small cells, so we expect Keene will be very dangerous. Nashua already in the red zone, Concord already in the red zone, Stratham in the blackout zone. Here in Boston, a resident down in the North End, she and I went and walked around and we got readings as high as over 500,000. And these beautiful looking wrought iron lampposts, guess what? These are fancy cell towers. They put the really pretty ones on Hanover Street, which is a big tourist area with all the beautiful Italian restaurants and bakeries. But as you can see above the shops, there are people living right at eye level with these cell towers right outside their homes. So the industry will come and say, oh, we can make these pretty. They can be aesthetically, pleasing. Well, they did that down Hanover Street. But when you look at the cross streets, there's this ugly gray monopole right outside people's living spaces. So they're sneaky and they're not looking out for you or for I. They're looking out for their bottom line. But we take encouragement from Martin Luther King Jr., who taught us that when we have things go wrong in our society, when we finally get to move it to right, it comes through three areas. One, the public engages, we learn, we band together, we speak up, and we demand change for solutions. That's what we're hoping to empower you to do tonight, is to start where you are, learn, come back time and again and ask questions, and bring everybody else with you so together you can learn. That's been my hard lesson learned. Do not go it alone. One voice is too easily swept under the rug when everybody's plates are already so full, and we never knew we had to make room on our overflowing plates to address this. Get everybody around you educated first, and then as a group, you get to share the load, and then you can't be ignored. Second, it goes through the courts. And third, public policy catches up, in this case, to the science. And I want to share quickly some really excellent inroads that are going on in all three areas. With legal solutions, the FCC just got sued for ignoring 11,000 pages of science entered into the public record. And when the FDA told the FCC, you don't have to change anything, the FCC wrote a statement and put it in something called the Federal Register that they're not going to change their radiation exposure levels. And once that hit the Federal Register, then the lawsuits could happen. The Environmental Health Trust, which is led by this Nobel Peace Prize co-laureate on climate change, Dr. Deborah Davis, and her team of scientists and doctors, they sued. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has a team of attorneys at the Children's Health Defense that try and protect us from environmental polluters. They sued, as did others, and all these were combined into one lawsuit under the Environmental Health Trust versus FCC. And at the end of the day, these three judges in the Ninth Circuit Court said to the FCC, well, show us your homework. How did you determine you can stick with those old guidelines from 1996 on radiating the public? And they just said, oh, the FDA said it was okay. The judges, of course, said, well, where's the FDA's homework? And there is none. Not one of our federal agencies has ever done the top to bottom review of the science and formed public policy. So they won that lawsuit, and the outcome is kind of a shallow victory because they turned around to the FCC and the court said, you now have to account for children's vulnerabilities. You have to account for electrosensitivities. You have to account for what the impact is on the environment. But there's been no deadline. And so the fox is still watching the hen house. So this is a long slog, folks. It's a marathon and not a sprint. And that's why it's essential to take control at the local level. So there are other lawsuits you can poke around with, but there are lawsuits that have been won and that have moved the needle towards safe technology. So take some time if you're interested in the law, poke around, and we can help talk you through what these are. So then when we look at the next way that change happens, it's through policy solutions. And I mentioned that we have had legislation. I think we had 20 bills in Massachusetts this session. And time and again over the last 10 years, we have moved the needle and gotten certain bills on smart meters, on forming a commission, on education. We've gotten them out of the first committee, but we've never enacted anything. So Deb Hodgson, who often co-hosts these public education webinars with us, she got really, really sick. And, you know, when this happens to you and you don't know about wireless, you get so sick, your doctors can't figure it out. So now you start spending thousands of dollars out of pocket, if you're one of the lucky people who have money to spend, to see specialists. Specialists haven't been trained on this. And so now you're getting sicker and sicker. In awful cases, they start referring you for psychiatric care because they don't know about it. So they must think you're crazy, right? So it is a nightmare when you become electrically ill. Thankfully, Deb's legislators, Representative Patrick Abrami, and eventually Senator Tom Sherman, they listened to Deb. And when Rep. Abrami was up for re-election, he's just a good man. He was knocking door to door and saying, could I please ask for your vote? Deb invited him in, told him how sick she got. And this goes up against everything that our engineers and physicists and technologists have been taught. And he was an engineer, right? So he's listening to her, and he goes back and does what every public servant should do. Go look at the science for yourself. And Rep. Abrami has this major wow moment, like, wow, what are we doing here? And he looks at the science and he writes a bill, and Deb introduces him to me. They get in his car from New Hampshire, drive to my house in Mass. We sit around my kitchen table for the afternoon, and I continue to connect the dots for him with the facts. He writes his bill that says, why do Lloyd's of London, Swiss Re, AM Best, why have they already recognized this as a world-leading risk? And they put exclusions. They don't cover damages. Why does that fine print that we went over say keep it away? And why is the FCC completely dropping the ball on the biological effects on this? And why is nobody looking at every source that we're getting bombarded with electrosmog? What are we doing? So even during the pandemic, well, in 2019, before the pandemic, in 7 months, we got this through the House, through the Senate, under the governor's pen. Please mute if you're not muted already. And within 7 months, we got this bill passed into law that they have to form a commission and investigate the biological effects to people and the environment. And even during the pandemic starting in 2020, even after their government shut down and came back online, they stuck to their 1-year deadline, and they brought in world-leading experts, and they had the foresight to put the industry on this commission as well, so that they could hear from everybody. And then they came out with this groundbreaking report. The consensus of 10 of the 13 members is that, yes, we have a serious problem here. They document the conflicts of industry with the conflicts of interest with the wireless industry, the FDA and the FCC. And then they make 15 recommendations in no particular order that we need to get our federal delegates on this. We need to protect ourselves at the state level. We need to protect ourselves at the municipal level. And we need to educate the public and get our schools and our public spaces hardwired and make these plans to transition there. So in New Hampshire, if there's not a full consensus, the minority can write a report too. There were 2 people from industry on that commission, and then there was Senator Gray, who even during the hearings was siding with industry. So those 3 wrote the minority report, which comes after the executive summary. So if you read the first 17 pages, you will get top to bottom what they recommend. And then the next 10 pages is also kind of a gift, because it's the industry playbook. All the stuff they tell when they come in to sell you product or infrastructure, it's all documented, and it looks good at first blush. What happened in the final meeting of this commission is Senator Denise Ricciardi looked at what that minority report said, and then in the minutes, and thank you, shout out to Deb Hodgson, she took minutes for all the meetings of this commission, and they are in this report. So if you go to the very back of the report, to the final commission meeting in October, you will see on page 5 and 6 of 11 of those final meeting minutes, Senator Ricciardi and Dr. Paul Heroux, who's one of the world's leading scientists who's created cancer in his lab using radio frequency, they debunk many of the points that the industry puts in their minority report. So we have the facts beautifully teed up for you. This is arguably the best document in our country today. And for those who are visual learners, Dr. Kent Chamberlain from the University of New Hampshire, he was the chair of the electrical and computer engineering department. He served on the commission and did a complete 180. He thought, of course, wireless is fine because he had worked, he's a published author in that field, no idea of the biological effects. Now that he knows, he is now educating the public and his colleagues on safe technology. So he did a 20-minute presentation for this bill, and you can access his slides there too. So fast forward from 2020, the end of 2020, to introducing legislation in 2022. This bill has just been reviewed this year, bipartisan. It would enforce that 500-meter setback as a starting point, and also make the industry pay for a registry of harm to be run by one of the state agencies. Because today, when people get so sick, there's nowhere they can go and log their symptoms. So again, Dr. Chamberlain did another set of slides and presentation to justify why scientifically they went for this minimum 500-meter setback. And as part of the testimony that's in the public record, Frank Clegg, who's the retired president of Microsoft Canada, sent in testimony that was read into the record by Ken Wells, who is also on the commission. He's a retired school teacher in science, and he read Frank Clegg's statement, and it included wireless technology is no longer advanced technology. It has outlived its useful life as a main source of connectivity. Fiber to and through the premises is where our world should be going, with using minimal exposures to wireless. And although this bill didn't pass outright, because again, things keep changing, and it wasn't the same legislators on this House committee as it was when we passed the bill in 2019. So we had to do this whole education again, but we got them educated enough by the end of the year that they said they could do one of two things. They could say, one, there's nothing here. We're just going to say we don't recommend ever doing anything on this issue again. Or two, there is something here, and in the next legislative session, we've got to do something and address this. And especially as far as our municipalities are concerned, we need to have a law that will empower them to protect their citizens with every viable option that is given to us through state and federal law. Because the industry comes in and says, oh, it's the law, you have to let us put up all this toxic infrastructure. That is not at all what the law says. If you strengthen your local zoning bylaws, you can put protections in, and we know how to guide you to do that. So on October 6th of this year, the House Committee on Science, Technology, and Energy voted 15-3 to introduce this new legislation in January. So that's being written right now. So again, folks, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, but you do have to start these conversations. And citizens are doing this all over the country. Here in Massachusetts, here's a bunch of examples of where we've made really meaningful inroads. And the industry comes into your town and says, oh, you know about that cell tower application. If there's somebody squeaking about that, those are just the NIMBYs, the folks who say, not in my backyard. Nobody else is concerned. That is disinformation. If you go to Americans for Responsible Technology and you look at their activist toolkit, you will see there are more than 150 groups all over the country already working on this that you can join. And if you don't have anybody near you, they have a whole toolkit for you to get started and start your own. So this is happening all over the world. And, you know, here in Massachusetts, look at all these amazing things that we have succeeded on. You can come back and look at those in more detail. When a grandmother in Easton, Connecticut figured out what 5G is, she went to her board, and there was a medical doctor serving on that board, and they looked at the science and decided, no, until the science proves this is safe, we want a moratorium on 5G. We don't want to put cell towers in our neighborhoods or on our schools or on our hospitals, our senior centers, our playing fields. So Easton, Connecticut initially did a moratorium, and this spring they re-upped their moratorium. Activists in Hawaii banded together on the Big Island of Hawaii, and they came up with a resolution with their public servants. This one doesn't have legal legs under it, but it's a huge signal to industry and an opportunity to educate everybody around you that this is not something to toy with. And you can look at the database at Environmental Health Trust and see that this is going on all over our world. But again, we don't hear about it through mainstream media. And one of the other big crimes here is that 21st century classroom that the industry sweet talked our state level administrators into putting into the curriculum that this technology has to be embedded. And that's how our schools are getting evaluated today. So when we bring this up in front of our school boards, there's been money given to our towns. There have been these grants. They think it's all great because now they're going to have this new cool technology. And never did the industry tell them of the harm. But look at this series of articles from Nellie Bowles at the New York Times. Silicon Valley executives are sending their children to schools with not hardwired technology, not wireless technology, but no technology, because they know a child's brain does not develop best in the shallows of a screen. It develops best through meaningful interactions with their teachers, with their parents, with their peers, with their natural environment. And Silicon Valley execs are going so far as to have their nannies sign contracts that there will be no screens around their children. So again, we have solutions at every turn. Our friends Patty and Doug Wood, they lead up their nonprofit is called Grassroots Environmental Education, and they set up projects under their nonprofit. Americans for Responsible Technology is one. The Baby Safe Project with Dr. Hugh Taylor at Yale is another. And then recently they have launched their Tech Safe Schools program, such that every parent, grandparent can contact them, and they have funding to send a packet to your school administrators that you can then follow up on. Again, don't go it alone. Get other parents educated around you first, so that when your life becomes too busy and you have to take a back seat for a bit, there are others there who can keep the ball moving. So go out there for their toolkit. They have a legal letter that explains to our school administrators why they are in legal jeopardy for damages for radiating the children and the staff, and what the health effects are, and most importantly, how to go from where we are to remediate and hardwire our schools and turn off the radiation. There's also curriculum developed by the Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition. From the wee little ones all the way up through high school, there's age-appropriate curriculum. And then Dr. Lexi McKnight and I just did professional development sessions with her children's schools down in Pennsylvania. We have video and slides for that. And then, as I mentioned, we have our schools and families course where we can do bulk training for your entire school in one afternoon, 1 hour, 1/2 hour. So we are here to support you at every turn. Our friends at the Environmental Health Trust have extensive printables, flyers, articles, science, everything you need to help you get this information out. Maryland has become the first health agency to recommend hardwiring our schools. And there's a green certifier for schools, the U.S. Collaborative for High Performance Schools. And with great thanks to Dr. Antonia Stein, they now have a module on EMFs, both for the radio frequency and another man-made form of harm, which is dirty electricity that can emanate off the wires into the indoor space 6 or 8 feet. And we know that that can cause another host of damages. So we have solutions for how to study at home safely. Cyprus already put them out to their public. Russia already put them out to their public. And here in the US, because our federal agencies are being run by industry, we are not protecting our kids, but we know how to do it. So solutions at every turn. Medical, there's a whole website with Dr. Cindy Russell, Dr. Joel Moskowitz, where they can go and look at it from the medical perspective. And then for our engineers, physicists, technologists, architects, urban planners, everybody, let's get on the same page. After we did that NIH conference, there was a call for papers, and now Frank Clegg and the scientists and the doctors and the building biologists wrote this incredible paper to train everybody how to get to safe and healthy buildings. And then there's Jeremy's TED Talks, and there's a whole bunch of other resources for the professions. So home and work, if you're not a do-it-yourselfer, please know there is an incredible organization called the Building Biology Institute, And they certify people who are making career changes to go out and help people to get to safe technology. Rob Metzinger of Safe Living Technologies that makes this particular meter, I was in touch with him this week, and he's got, I think, 40 some odd new consultants that are being certified this month. They've been training for years now, and they will be available to our communities along with the others who are already certified. So that's great news. You can hire somebody to either guide you remotely or to come into your home and look for mold, look for VOCs, look for formaldehyde, and look at all the electromagnetic field issues. This award-winning film, Generation, was part of the United Nations Film Festival, and I was honored to be asked to contribute my work with the schools in there, and you'll hear from world-leading scientists and doctors. It's non-threatening. It's a lovely 74-minute way to bring people, this is what you should do, is sit down with your friends and your neighbors and the parents of your kids and the grandparents and just do a living room screening. It's now available on Amazon Prime. Most of the library streaming services now carry this, so you can get it very easily. But that's a great way to start the conversation. And look at this, even PBS, Bert Wolf on his travel show, with great thanks to Camilla Reese and Dr. Erica Mallory Blythe out of the UK. We now have two, I think they're 28-minute episodes. How cool is that, that's mainstream? And then here it is, the toolkit with Americans for Responsible Technology will guide you through exactly what you need to do to go to your town and say, guys, I think we're in trouble here. We need to revisit our zoning bylaws. Here's a template. Here's a checklist to see what do we have and what's missing. And here's some real life examples of how to make this fly. So there's no cavalry coming. We have to do this ourselves. So, we also need to be mindful of you and I being role models for those around us, especially the children, because monkey see, monkey do, and they will do what we are doing. So this poster reminds us, limit our time in front of a screen and go out and do what we used to do. Get involved in music, go write poetry, go write a book, go talk to a neighbor, go support a neighbor who needs help, go out in the woods, meditate, go pet a cat, do whatever makes you happy, and definitely connect to the earth. So every biological cell is meant to be synchronized to the earth because we exchange electrons by physically connecting with the earth. But because we now use rubber-soled shoes, our roads are paved with a petrolatum product that doesn't allow that energy to come up. It's really important to naturally ground ourselves to the earth. And this Earth Prescription book by Dr. Laura Conover takes it through all 4 seasons on how we can ground naturally. And for those of us in the Northeast, we can't do this part walking around on the grass every day, but there are excellent solutions to ground naturally in her book. So here's the solutions for our municipalities again. The CDC already has radiation advice that says get to as low as reasonably achievable, reduce the amount of time, create as much distance as you can with radiation. And if you can't get away from it, you better shield. That's why we wear lead aprons for x-rays. So let's make our goal in our homes and in our communities to adhere to the ALARA principle, as low as reasonably achievable. So use these resources. Reinventing Wires is an excellent free downloadable booklet that will guide our towns through the many things we have to look at now that technology is here to stay. And always measure not against the FCC limits, because we know those don't protect us, but against the limits that the building biologists give us based on science. So what do? There's no safe level of man-made radio frequency. And Dr. Linda Birnbaum, who retired from the top of the house at the science in our government, said, although there are still some good people in our federal agencies, it's really going to take us building it up from the grassroots level at the local and state level to push it up to affect change at the federal level. So I had a hunch that's what it would take, but to hear one of our federal agents, now retired, tell us that, we know what our work is. So let's continue to educate the public, come back to these info sessions, bring others. I just figured out how to do a QR code recently, so that's on our flyer. If you go out to Massachusetts for Safe Technology on our events page, the current one is always there, and we'll be selecting our January date soon. But I can be brought in to do information sessions with your town. You know, there are examples here where we've made unbelievable inroads just simply by educating. And we've got to get in there and train our schools and staff, because if you talk to a school nurse today, somebody who's been around a while, and you describe the headaches, the nosebleeds, the nausea, the dizziness, the anxiety, the suicidal ideation, the skin rashes, the vomiting, all of that, they will tell you that if they stop and think about it, that's what happened when the wireless came into the schools. And that's what they deal with now every single day with both the children and the adults in their schools. So we know how to do this, but let's start where we are. Start where you are today. Look at what organizations or clubs you're a member of and invite them in. Even if they don't come right away, every time you invite them, you have planted a critically important seed. So all your professional organizations and clubs, start the conversation. So next step, our town should be forming safety committees. They should be guided to offer no-fee opt-outs and then tell their energy partners to hardwire this stuff and not allow wireless in. Strengthen those bylaws and don't be shy about hiring an actual expert attorney, because most of our town's attorneys are out of their depth where the industry is concerned. But fortunately, there are attorneys around the country. Andrew Campanelli is one. He wins most of his cases when it goes to court if you stop it before the cell tower goes in. Once they put it in, it's nearly impossible, although we have seen it done. You've got to get your bylaws done up front. And that's where we've got these checklists and stuff with our friends at Americans for Responsible Technology. But really, our town attorneys have only heard from industry, and quite often they parrot the industry because they know there's a revenue stream coming to the town. So for today, let's think about reducing our exposures. Start by noticing what is radiating, and then don't be hard on yourselves. Don't feel guilty for what you've already exposed yourself and your loved ones in. I always tell my kids, if something's upsetting them, go scream into a pillow, get it out of your system. And now today's a new day. What can we do? Start taking baby steps. First of all, create a sleep sanctuary. Turn off everything in your house at night if you can. Your alarm clock, your downloaded entertainment, all of that still works in airplane mode. You don't want to charge near where you sleep because that dirty electricity can disrupt your sleep too. But create that sleep sanctuary and then migrate toward the Ethernet cables. It's not rocket science. And choose airplane mode as often as you can, even when you're on the go, and then only use the one antenna that you need for whatever service, be it texting or calls or data. But turn everything else off, Bluetooth, locator, hotspot. Don't expose yourself. And then our friends at Environmental Health Trust have all these, you know, 1-pagers, 2-pagers, checklists, postcards, flyers, everything you need to talk to somebody at their level. They've already done it. So thank you so much. I know this is like drinking water out of a fire hose, but right now we'll go ahead and stop the slide presentation. You can reach us. You got the invitation today, so you know how to reach us there. We also have Facebook pages and our website. We partner with other state level groups. No sense reinventing the wheel. We invite people to replicate what we have at Massachusetts for Safe Technology. We've got the scientific resources. We've got tools for how to get started. So by all means, come and use what we've already done so that you can then step up into this. So, Lori, thank you for staying with us tonight. Can you let us know if you want to unmute, if there's anything in the chat?
Yes, there is.
Okay.
Thank you, Cece. Yeah, there are some questions I'll read to you. The first one is, please address issues of Tesla solar roof and its associated equipment.
Okay. Tesla is interesting. Dr. Cindy Russell's father-in-law had given her husband a Tesla car. And when I was out there for either the medical conference or the world premiere of Generation Zapped, she asked me to go in her car with her, and we went on the Tesla and drove it around, and it was wild because it has like this big computer screen, almost like a tablet right on the dashboard. And we discovered that we could make it almost a safe car because we had the option to turn off all the antennas in there. So again, that's our goal, to get to as low as reasonably achievable. I don't know specifically about the solar, if Tesla's doing a rooftop solar thing, but if those are two separate questions, we worked a lot with the companies that we interviewed for our solar system, and we made sure that the panels that they were putting up on our rooftop didn't have any wireless component to the panels themselves. And then we put the utility meter as far away from our sleeping areas as we could. I'm not sensitive to the dirty electricity, but some people are. So you just have to measure. You have to measure. And I had gone out, I had asked the company we eventually bought our solar system from if I could please connect with some of their current customers. And I actually went to somebody's house and went inside the house on the other side of the wall. And I measured how much radiation and how often that was coming off of the meter they were about to install on our home. So I gathered my data and made my decisions based on that. Unfortunately, I'm in a district in Massachusetts with Eversource that does not offer an opt-out. People who live in national grid territory in our state, they do offer an opt-out. You have to pay to have the analog meter put back on, and then they kind of do an extortion thing and make you pay a tariff or a fee every month on your bill just to have a safe way to report your utility consumption, which really is unconscionable. So we do have a bill in Massachusetts to try and give everybody the right to opt out. We've been testifying with the Department of Public Utilities to say, when they upgrade this grid modernization, they've got to do it without radio frequency radiation. Whether it's a whole nother corrupt industry with the energy industry, we'll have to see what happens in the coming months as they start to upgrade their grid. So I hope that answers that question. You just have to measure and you have to investigate.
Okay, we have another one here that has a lot of questions from Allison.
Yeah.
What is the growing problem with radiation in the new cars, and how do we turn off the antenna in our smartphones if we have one, or is there a way to turn them off if we don't have a smartphone, which I guess they're saying if you have a different kind of phone? And then she's also asking, how many antennas do the new cars typically have? I've heard that you can download directions from Google Maps so you don't have to stream them en route. Has anyone done that? How easy or difficult?
Okay, I'll take part of that, Lori, and then I will ask you to share your experience with the map thing, okay? So, yes, many of the new car models are loaded with radio frequency. My husband is a gearhead and a gadget guy, and he loves technology. And he had seen the new Rivian, which is the fully electric truck. They were going to come off the assembly line with the first ones. They were supposed to be delivered, and then the pandemic and all the supply chain issues happened. And he wound up having to wait about a year. And they delivered that truck, and he runs in. I was in a meeting, so he just grabbed my meter and ran out to measure it. And that truck is on fire with radiation. And it comes from many, many different sensors all around these new vehicles. And in fact, even when the truck is not turned on, it still is going into the red zone on my meter just by sitting there. So whatever transmitters are on it, some of them don't turn off when you turn off the vehicle. So be very, very careful. Personally, I am not interested in that kind of technology. And so when I need a different car, I look for a low mile, older model, preferably before probably 2006, when they started putting wheel well sensors, backup cameras, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, all of that in the car. Some cars allow you to turn things off, others don't. And so you have to be very careful and you have to measure. So Again, Dr. Havas with her study at Global EMF Monitoring, she's asking her citizen scientists like you and I to do another study with her, which is to measure every one of our cars using her protocol and then put that information into her database. That empowers her to take that data to the manufacturers and say, look, here's what your current fleet is doing. We think you can do better. And then your customer base will be happier. So there is that good work going there in the cars. So Lori, do you want to share with us how you navigate being electrically sensitive in your car?
Okay, I also will share, since I do have a smartphone, once I put it in airplane mode and then turn off the Wi-Fi antenna, the Bluetooth antenna, and the hotspot antenna, then my phone registers in the green. So those are the ones that I turn off. When I'm needing to have navigation, I can first ask for the directions, and then I can, once it's on the phone or on the car, which has Air CarPlay, it's called. I have a Subaru 2019, and it will, speak through it, but I don't use the Bluetooth because I plug the phone into the car. And when it has AirPlay, you don't need Bluetooth to connect your phone. You're connected through a wire. So my Bluetooth and my Wi-Fi are off in my car. My car registers in the green, except when I turn the phone on to download the directions, obviously I'm getting a signal. And then once the directions are downloaded, I put the phone in airplane mode and it takes me where I want to go, except if I have to reroute, if I make a mistake or it's a very complicated area, I will take off airplane mode because it needs to connect again for that brief time.
Yeah. Thank you, Lori. That's super. And you've taught me to do that as well. I generally try to print out directions if I'm going somewhere new, just because we know sometimes there are dead zones and I don't want to be out there stuck. So I'm old school, so I still print out my directions. But I also will use that if I need to, if I can't follow the directions right or something. So, all right. Any other questions in the chat tonight?
Yeah, there are. Okay. From, well, this is also from Allison. How powerful are the antennas used by Google's Nest, N-E-S-T, thermostat? And where are they typically situated? Are they on the roof? Is there a way to remediate them? What good reason, if any, is there for having a smart thermostat that relies on wireless technology? Does Steckler's smart meter
Dr. Tim Sheckley.
EMMA protocol include AI for handling wired smart thermostats, and what are the privacy issues, if any?
Okay, that's great, Allison. Thank you for those questions. So the Nest is a home thermostat that you would replace your good old regular digital or analog thermostat with. The antennas are actually in the device that's mounted on the wall, and it's sending wireless signals just like your cell phone does. And they are high. They are high. And I know a little boy in Natick whose home had the Nest, and they also had wireless gaming systems. They had, all the technology in there, and couldn't figure out why he was neurologically crashing. So you definitely want to remediate those things. They may help you sleep better too. And some people want them because they, if they're in Italy and they're going to be flying home that night and they want to have their house warm when they get home, they could use technology remotely to turn that on. Dr. Timothy Sheckley is one of the leading engineers. He's worked for the telecom industry for years, but he also understands the biological effects. And he is working on this EMMA protocol so that when we bring fiber technology to the premises, we can then hook up everything in the house through wires. So I don't know enough about his EMMA protocol, but that's what he's working on. Hopefully, whatever is done wirelessly inside our physical buildings today can be engineered simply to hook up through an Ethernet cable or an adapter to the internet that's coming into your home off the street through fiber optics or high-speed cable. So I hope that answers those questions.
Okay, Allison also says the CEO of Verizon used to be the CEO of Ericsson. And then P. Moss says, is there a chance the movement to electric vehicles and that whole gigantic electronic infrastructure plan to support them create an even bigger problem with more EMFs everywhere?
Yes. Yes, you know, out in Arizona, they were piloting or getting ready to pilot the super highway and these smart cities. Yeah, every addition you make, you are layering on more and more and more radiation. And we know that with any toxin, this included, the more you radiate, the bigger the dose and the higher the likelihood that you're going to become ill. And our cells, whether you consciously feel this or not, it is damaging us and it's damaging our cells. So again, let's keep moving the needle toward the ALARA principle. As low is reasonably achievable, and there's no cavalry coming to fix it. We do this through education. You get to a comfort level, or even if you're only a little ways there where you can see the problem, let's start working on solutions with your towns and your legislators. And I can be brought in for meetings for all of that. So you don't have to know it by heart yourself. Just know where to go for the resources. And we are honored to help you with that.
I wanted to add to that because a friend of mine has a Tesla and she came to my house to pick something up, and I measured with both the EMF meter, which actually was not bad because, you know, her phone was off and I think maybe the antennas were not active at that time. But I also used my magnetic field meter, which is a separate meter, and that was very high. And it was high just when it turned on, and then even higher when she drove it down the road. So that was the magnetic field meter. Okay, so great information. Excellent. Thank you. That was from P. Moss. And
yeah, if I could just add to that, Lori, I
Okay.
love that you brought up the other types of man-made electromagnetic fields. So for anybody who would really like to learn a little bit more, I was so enthralled at the EMF medical conference. So a lot of healthcare practitioners are brandy new to this topic, and to get people prepared for the conference, Dr. Magda Havas, who is one of the co-chairwomen for this conference, she did a 4-credit pre-conference course that anybody can take now for very short money, like, I don't know, $19 or something. But if you go to the EMF Medical Conference website, which you can access through the events page at Massachusetts for Safe Technology, she takes us through all 4 kinds of EMF: the radio frequency, the electric fields, the magnetic fields, and the electromagnetic fields. And so you can go learn about each one of those. And that's what Lori's talking about, is people who are sensitive, or maybe tomorrow's the day that you hit that tipping point and become sensitive. You will need to learn shielding from those other man-made EMFs. But how great that we have that training. So feel free to go register, whether you need credits or not. You can take the entire conference, including the pre-EMF conference, for $39 if you don't need the credits. And if you do need the credits, all of it's less than $100. So please, please encourage everybody you know, especially in the healthcare and in the public safety areas, to get trained on that.
there is there are 2 more comments. RL says, please tell everyone to give the information regarding the EMF conference to their physicians and their children's physicians and older family members' physicians, and also regarding the column of scientific studies from Physicians for Safe Technology.org. And then RL also says, unfortunately, efforts to ask content leaders to provide the information resources to CMM Med, that's sort of cut off maybe.
Okay. So yeah, we only have this medical conference until June. You have to register by the 15th, and then it expires July 1st. So take this seriously. stay on top of your healthcare practitioners. I've been trying to work with my primary care physician, and she's a functional medicine practitioner. And when I went in for my physical recently, they they first handed me a tablet to sign in with, and I said, no, thank you. I don't want to touch a radiating device. So the girl on the other side of the counter signed me in. Then I went into the exam room, and the young man who's practicing to be a doctor comes in with his tablet to ask me the basic questions. And I had to teach him about the EMFs. And then before the doctor came in, somebody else came in and handed me a decked cordless phone. And I went, why? And they said, well, the doctor's going to call you. And I said, you mean to tell me my doctor's not even going to come in the exam room? I saw her out there. And they said, well, we can ask her to come in. And I said, please do. And I explained to her that, one, I wanted to see my doctor. And two, I did not want to have an exam that involved microwave radiation. And I had brought the sheet with, the information packet for her for the medical conference. She says, her response, well, it's everywhere. I said, yes, it is, but it's a choice. So I'm hoping she'll take it to heart. But all we can do is try and keep trying. And the next time I talk to her, I'm going to follow up and find out if she got trained.
Cece, I was wondering with the tablet, I mean, how do you know that it was not on airplane mode and it was maybe just a sign-in kind of thing, but not necessarily a cellular?
Yeah, you can see the antennas. Just like on the phone, I think you can see that the antennas are going, right? I don't own a tablet. But my tell is my pinky finger. When I'm holding a radiating device, my pinky finger starts tingling. And now I know enough to know that it's causing oxidative stress in my blood.
Okay.
Right?
So
my
RL
body
added
biofeedback. I'm like one of those canaries.
Well, that's great. Well, RL added to her comment about CME conferences in psychiatry and neurology and nursing and cardiology are not putting this information out. I have asked in multiple CME virtual conferences, and many have taken away the chat room. So the thought leaders are getting the information and references. This includes primary care and oncology. The physicians are not getting it, and it is not for lack of effort.
Yeah, it's not for lack of effort. I worked with Libby Kelly on this conference, and I was doing outreach to professional medical associations and nursing associations and inviting them to the conference and asking them to put this out on their, channels. And some would, some wouldn't. It was in the middle of a pandemic where they were up against everything. And it was a really hard conversation to have. But if you go out to the EMF medical conference, you will see that if you look at their resources and partners, you'll see that there are a lot of health organizations that have partnered with the conference, and maybe you can leverage off of that. So yeah, I see Sydney just popped in a comment saying, yeah, they're all using it in active mode in your offices at the medical facilities. So we need to teach them. There's nobody who's going to do it for us. So, but listen, folks, I have to jump off onto another call. Was there anything else pressing in the chat that we want to cover?
No, I read everything pretty much. Okay.
Lori, thank you so very much for co-hosting with us tonight and for everything that you've done. I know you've worked really hard in Keene, New Hampshire to educate those public servants and in your own town. So it's what we need to do. So please keep at it, everybody. Reach out if we can help. And we wish you a very happy holiday season, and we'll be back with you in January, but feel free to reach out in the interim. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.